Have you ever thought about how just one single verse, a single line from a sacred text, can echo through centuries, shaping history, law, and theology? Well, today we're doing just that. We're going to put one pivotal verse under the microscope, conducting a real forensic analysis of a prayer in the Quran to see how its interpretation created ripples that are still felt today. Let's dive in. So here's our game plan. We'll start with the verse itself, the absolute heart of the matter. Then we're going to unpack the key terms, the words that are central to this whole debate. After that, we'll look at the competing interpretations, the evidence for each. And then, and this is crucial, we'll connect all of this theology to a major event in history.
All right, our investigation begins right where it has to, with the primary source text, a deeply personal prayer from the prophet Zechariah recorded in the Quran.
What you're looking at right here is a page from the source document for our analysis. It's a scholarly exegesis, a deep dive commentary, and it zooms right in on this one moment where Zechariah, who's an elderly prophet, expresses a very specific fear about his relatives, about the people who will come after him. And here it is. This is the verse that has fueled so much discussion for centuries. Zechariah is praying for an heir. But the entire mystery, the whole puzzle, really hinges on two crucial words, fear and inherit. What did he actually mean? That's the question we have to get to the bottom of. So this is it. This is the central question that drives our entire investigation. Was he worried about his money and his property being misused, or was it something much, much bigger than that? To figure this out, we're going to have to become linguistic detectives.
Okay, now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty. Before we can even touch the different arguments, we have to define a couple of key Arabic terms. This is where the details are everything. First up, we have the word irth. It's the Arabic word for inheritance or heritage. But here's the core of the dispute. What kind of inheritance are we talking about? Is it material stuff, like land and wealth? Or is it something you can't touch, like spiritual wisdom and the role of a prophet?
Next, we have mawali. These are the relatives, the potential heirs or successors that Zechariah says he's afraid of. So what was the fear? Was it a financial worry, a fear that they would just waste all his property? Or was it a spiritual crisis, a fear that they would corrupt his divine mission? So now that we've defined our terms, we can finally lay out the two competing schools of thought. This is where the intellectual battle really begins. Okay, so on one side, you have the argument for material wealth. The people who hold this view say, look, worth usually just means property. It's the plain, simple meaning. They'd argue that Zechariah was human and he had a perfectly natural concern that his wealth should be handled by a righteous person. But then you have the other side, the argument for spiritual inheritance. This view says his fear was all about his prophetic legacy. Let's really dig into the evidence our source presents for this second interpretation.
Our source builds its case on three main pillars. First, there's the character argument, the idea that a prophet's primary concern, by definition, would be for his spiritual mission, not his personal bank account. Second, the lineage argument. The prayer specifically says inherit from the family of Jacob, and that was a line of prophets, not a line of wealthy kings. And third, the contextual argument. If you read the verses around this prayer, they're all about prophecy and divine revelation, not money.
Now, our analysis takes a turn. We're going to bring in another crucial layer of evidence. We're shifting from interpreting the Quran itself to looking at the hadith, the recorded traditions and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, to see what they have to say about this. And this is a really critical step in this kind of analysis. I mean, if it's true that prophets only leave a spiritual inheritance, you would expect to see that idea pop up somewhere else, right? So the big question is, do the prophetic narrations actually support this concept? And this is the pivotal piece of evidence that the source brings to the table. It's a widely known narration from the Prophet Muhammad himself, and it's an incredibly direct statement. We, the community of prophets, do not leave inheritance. What we leave behind is charity. This isn't presented as a piece of advice. It's framed as a definitive, fundamental rule. So, according to our source, this narration isn't just one more piece of evidence to consider. No, it's presented as the foundational principle. It's the lens through which every other mention of inheritance related to a prophet, including Zechariah's prayer, is supposed to be understood. All right, so far we've been deep in theology and linguistics, but now we get to the historical fallout, because our source argues that this whole analysis is not just some abstract academic debate. It connects directly to one of the most consequential and debated events in all of early Islamic history.
And this is exactly where theory crashes into history. This whole debate over what a prophet inherits became the absolute central issue when Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, laid claim to a piece of land called Fadak as her inheritance. And the principle that prophets do not leave inheritance was the very basis for the official response she received from the caliphate. And if you look here, these pages from our source document really show you the meticulous scholarly work that goes into this. The author is carefully building the case, citing chains of transmission, quoting other scholars, and directly connecting the interpretation of that one Qur'anic verse to the historical drama surrounding Fatima's claim. It's a perfect example of a detailed, text-based forensic argument.
Okay, let's step back and pull all these threads together. Let's summarize the profound consequences of the interpretation that's been laid out in our source document. So, here are the key takeaways from our forensic analysis, based on the source we've examined. The argument is that for prophets, irth, inheritance, is spiritual. It's about knowledge and duty. That means Zechariah's fear was about his mission, not his money. This interpretation, then, directly shapes how we understand major historical claims. And finally, the source presents this not as a one-off idea, but as a consistent principle backed up by both scripture and prophetic tradition.
So let's end with this, a question that pushes us beyond this one specific case. If the true inheritance of a prophet is knowledge and not property, how does that completely reframe our ideas about spiritual authority and leadership? It challenges us to ask what it really means to be a successor. Definitely something to think about.